I was the lead author on the American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement that was published in 2014. And with the data that we had, we recommended a start time of 8:30 or later, because that would best accommodate not only circadian rhythms, but allow students to get enough sleep. And it turns out that that was a good recommendation, because what we're seeing is the schools that change to 8:30 or later get the biggest bang for their buck.
School districts around the country, including Arlington, are paying attention to this research and working to adjust high school start times to better accommodate an adolescent's natural sleep patterns.
With this circadian delay, most teenagers aren't able to fall asleep much before 11 p.m. And they're also pretty hardwired by virtue of these circadian rhythms to wake at around 8 a.m. And that also has to do with how much sleep teenagers need. So our best evidence suggests that it's somewhere between 8.5 and 10 hours of sleep. There's some individual variation. But if you start getting below 7 hours on a chronic basis, then we start to see negative outcomes. Obviously, if school starts at 7:10, not only does that mean that teenagers have to wake up before they get enough sleep, but we're also asking them to wake up at a time when their brains are telling them to be fast asleep.
The consequences of sleep deprivation can be serious.
There are many studies which show a link between insufficient sleep in adolescents and an increased risk of depression and even of suicidal thoughts. And because suicide is the third highest cause of death in adolescents, that becomes a public health issue. The number one cause of death in adolescents are accidents. And there's also clearly a link between drowsy driving and between an increase in motor vehicle accidents.
Science in hand, school districts have needed to work together to implement change. In the Middlesex Sports League, the push for later start times is thanks in part to this letter. In March 2016, all 12 Middlesex League superintendents voiced support for a move to 8 or 8:30 a.m. high school start times and set a goal of fall 2018 for districts to make the change.
We knew that in our communities, one of the things that people would say about not having later start time is that it had to do with athletics, which is why we came together as a group and took athletics out of the equation.
One nearby district that has already moved to a later start time is Concord-Carlisle. They pushed their high school's opening from 7:30 to 8 a.m. this past fall.
There used to be a kind of a sucking sound that would happen in A block, which is our first period, and that sucking sound was a sound of just exhausted kids, and trying to drag them across whatever we were trying to do was sometimes painful. And I've just noticed, I think, not only for them, but also for myself, to start a little bit later gives me a little more time to prep at the beginning of school, allows me to meet with students before school, but also when they get here, they're ready to go. We have a lot fewer problems with late students in the morning. We still have kids come in late, but it's nowhere near what it used to be. It used to be you'd have sometimes 25% of a class missing in the morning, and that's really disruptive.
The change is what's best for the students, he says, but it also took the will of school administrators to address the logistical questions involved and make it happen.
And there are a number of considerations. It's that school districts have had to face with this kind of change, one of which is buses. The other issues are really about how this works in a family with elementary students. Will a middle school or a high school sibling be home when an elementary student comes home? What kind of wraparound services can we have for students? So I think there are logistic issues I want to be sensitive to, but then at the end of the day, we still need to make what we think is the best decision for students in Arlington.
At the time of the Middlesex letter, Arlington had the latest start time at 8 a.m., but now other districts are moving to even later schedules. 5 local school districts are set to implement the new schedules this fall. Burlington was out in front pushing for later school start times. They voted to move their high school opening time back by an hour. Melrose, Stoneham, Watertown, and Winchester are also adjusting their schedules. Lexington and Arlington are in the process of discussing later start times and aiming to introduce changes by fall 2019.
It has effect on student performance. We have students that are asleep, find they can't help but fall asleep during the school day. So the hope is that Arlington will move. It will not happen next year to a later start time. Probably the goal would be 8:30. My preference would be to have both the middle school and the high school both have the same start time as they do right now.
Owen says school districts are becoming more responsive to the science. She hears a lot fewer misconceptions, like if children get up later, they will just go to bed later.
You know, when I first started talking about this, invariably I'd get somebody, you know, standing up and saying, oh, this is scientific hocus pocus, and, you know, you don't have enough research and evidence and blah, blah, blah. I don't hear that very often anymore. But that doesn't mean it's not hard for communities to bite the bullet and make the change.
For Arlington Public News, I'm Hannah Schuster.